This is Guns and Butter.
Something happening, yeah. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there.
Now let's look at this compromise. This was the deed done in the dead of night at about a little bit before midnight on Friday night last week, that Obama negotiated this with Congressman Boehner, right, the Speaker of the House, and with Harry Reid of the Senate Democratic majority. But the interesting thing is the only group of people that really have any different view were completely excluded, and this were the House Democrats. And Congresswoman Pelosi, now deprived of all power, was not even part of the talk. She was nowhere. She was a non-person. And she then came out and said, I have no stake in this, I don't own it, and she voted against it. But let's just see what this is. It is a cut of $80 billion. You notice that after this happened, Obama went on television with the Washington Monument behind him and the Lincoln Memorial, saying these are both going to be open tomorrow, right? They won't be shut down, and I have carried out the biggest single budget cut in U.S. history. And he boasted of this. This is now a credential for a Democratic president.
I'm Bonnie Faulkner. Today on Guns and Butter, Webster Tarpley. Today's show, Austerity Psychosis Grips Washington, D.C. Webster Tarpley is an economic historian, author, and lecturer. He is author of Against Oligarchy, Surviving the Cataclysm, A Study of the World Financial Crisis, 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in the USA, and co-author of George Bush, The Unauthorized Biography. His latest books are Obama, The Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, and Obama, The Unauthorized Biography. Today we discuss Obama's budget speech at George Washington University of April 13th, 2011, the Fiscal 2011 Budget Resolution, the Independent Payment Advisory Board, Paul Ryan's budget resolution for the year 2012, Medicare and Medicaid, derivatives, and the price of oil. Webster Tarpley, welcome.
Thank you very much.
What is your assessment of Obama's budget speech at George Washington University that he gave on April 13th?
I think it is a tragic moment. It's full of ominous portent. It is really a final sign that the tremendous potential of the moment of 2008 has now been completely destroyed and aborted by Obama. Those are moments that come along once every 60 to 70 years, right? It was something like the Roosevelt 100 Days might have been possible with a different cast of characters, starting with a different president and a different Congress. But the potential was certainly there. And if that had been done, the Republican Party could have been almost completely destroyed, except as a regional expression of certain racist or oligarchical social views in the Deep South. But that was not done. So we have this huge resurgence of the reactionaries precisely because of Obama's methods. In other words, using kind of left cover, I guess you'd say still, but to cover a complete Wall Street program, to act as a wholly owned asset of Wall Street. Now, if you were listening to this speech, you could hear the troubles began very early on when he began to talk about rugged individualism. Well, rugged individualism was the campaign slogan of Herbert Hoover in 1932. And then he got to self-reliance, which is Ralph Waldo Emerson, not exactly the best guide under any circumstances. The real big mistake, or the crime, the betrayal of Obama, really, is that he accepts now the idea that political debate has to center on budget cutting, deficits, debt, and this lugubrious apparatus of the reactionary Republicans. He has accepted their world of thought, right? Their whole way of posing these problems. If you remember back in the election campaign, both parties were parroting jobs, jobs, jobs. But now there is no talk of jobs. And rather what it is the way in which the middle class will be gouged and destroyed. And I think you can see this in Obama's speech. Now, the speech was meant to reassure his followers, who are by now very, very worried, that he was not going to repeat his outright betrayal of December 7th, with the Bush tax cuts being prolonged, and also this surreptitious attack on Social Security by lowering the payroll tax for 1 year or 2 years, which is a very material weakening of the future of Social Security. They were afraid that he would capitulate right away to the Ryan budget, so he had to put up a demagogic smokescreen that he was not going to do that. So some of them were duped. I have to add, Obama's followers really want to be duped, so he duped quite a few of them. But I think in the middle of this thing, there were a couple of things that you can point out in the speech. One is, he says that there's going to be a trigger mechanism, a fail-safe trigger mechanism in the year 2014, meaning that if all of his mechanisms that he puts in place for austerity, for cuts, for gouging the American people, attacking the middle class under left cover, if that has not produced sufficient cuts in the deficit, then there will be this moment when it sounds like something like rescissions, across-the-board budget cuts might be forced onto Congress. The mechanism of this is not clear, and I'm sure we're not being told the whole truth about what he has in mind. But if you remember the Graham-Rudman-Hollings Act of the 1980s, that was the planned train wreck with rescissions, with automatic across-the-board budget cuts of equal percentages in everything if the deficits were still growing. And, of course, they fudged it for quite a few years with Graham-Rudman-Hollings, but with Obama, he's basically saying 2014 is going to be the moment when the fail-safe trigger comes into play. Some have already said Obamageddon 2014. If the world doesn't end in 2012, according to the Aztec calendar, then it's going to be in 2014. So this is very ominous. And his entire approach is this notion, I would really call it something like budget Bonapartism, in the sense that you're finding mechanisms that take the spending power out of the hands of Congress and put it somewhere else. And I'd like to see the details on this trigger plan. The other one that I think is very, very scary is that he basically talks about Medicare. Remember, he already gouged $500 billion, $1.5 trillion was gouged out of Medicare as part of his Obamacare bill of a year ago. And now he wants almost the same amount to be gouged out over the coming years. So another $480 billion, call it $500 billion. So $1 trillion of Medicare cuts. And how will this be managed? He talks now about his own creation, his baby, which is the Independent Payment Advisory Board. And I'm really sorry, I don't want to offend anybody, but that's a death panel. There's just no way around it. Medicare has rationing boards, healthcare rationing. And the effect of these rationing boards is that they condemn people not to get treatment under certain circumstances. If the bureaucrats decide that you're too old or too sick or your life is not worth living, then that's the end of you. One is IMAC, Independent Medical Advisory Council, I think is one. There's another one called MedPAC, Medicare Permanent Advisory Committee. That's another one. Obama's new bill created the Independent Payment Advisory Board, IPAB. And that's the one that he talks about. And he says that they're the ones who are going to make binding decisions in terms of rationing of care. And the Congress will not be involved unless the Congress chooses to override those decisions, in which case maybe a supermajority would be necessary for that. So I think that's really, really ominous. The whole mentality now is gouging. The world of Washington is gripped by austerity psychosis, and I think this is an excellent term. Back in the Weimar Republic, there were a couple of writers. One of them was a guy called Erkelenz, not very well known, but he wrote a book about what in German is called Abbauwahn, meaning austerity lunacy or austerity psychosis, the obsession with deconstructing things that exist, right? That's sort of what it means. We are now in the midst of an austerity psychosis. We have austerity ghouls, as I call them, austerity vampires running around everywhere. We have all kinds of competing commissions, and I'll talk about them in just a minute. I think we have to, though, compare Obama's speech, which, of course, is a device designed to deceive primarily, or reassure in some cases, with now the dirty compromise that emerged, I guess, a day later in the course of that week. And this is now the fiscal year 2011 budget, the year we're now in up until October 1st.
Webster, before I ask you about the fiscal 2011 budget resolution, with regard to this independent payment advisory board that you say he mentioned in his George Washington University speech, is this advisory board, does this already exist, or is this something that he is proposing?
It exists, and this is the creation of his Obamacare bill passed about a year ago. There were boards, bureaucrats deciding to ration care, to deny care. That's what it means. The IMAC and the MedPAC exist. He added yet another layer, and he wants to give them binding power with no appeal. They will become arbiters of life and death. And let me hasten to say, if you want to save money on Medicare, this is not the way. And the most obvious way, you want to save money, you must make massive investments in biomedical research to cure diseases. Some people have talked about the coming epidemic of Alzheimer's, the dementia of the elderly, that's a $35 trillion to $40 trillion problem. Well, not if you cure it. So why not attack it from the side of cures? I would personally condemn any approach which is based on the rationing, meaning the denial of existing forms of care, which exist as approved protocols, and telling people they can't have them. No, they should always be given access to these. They should be able to choose them, obviously. They don't have to have them, but many I think are going to choose them. And if those don't work, then probably that's all we can do. But every effort should be made for every individual human life. Essentially, the debate we have now is the Republicans want to kill you, Ryan. They want to kill you through the anonymous method of the market. In other words, the Ryan plan, in particular what he has for Medicare, is that you will not be given a program. They'll simply give you a voucher, and the voucher will say, this is good for $5,000 a year or whatever it is, but you've got to give that to a private insurance company. Now, you're 65, you're 70, you're 75, you're sick, you're old. What's going to be the insurance rate for you? It's going to be $10 or $15 or whatever it is, $1,000. And you're sitting there with your little $5,000 voucher. And Ryan will say, I didn't do it. It was the market. It was the anonymous mechanism of the market that decided that you shouldn't have care. It's obviously a mystification. The older Democratic method is to say, we'll have boards of bureaucrats, faceless, unelectable, unaccountable, and unappealable. Bureaucrats tell you, no, your quality of life is no good. That was the philosophy of this guy Berwick, which Obama was able to impose for a while as the head of Medicare. Berwick got a recess appointment, and I think he was in there for about a year. But it was found in the spring of this year that there was no chance of getting him through the Senate. So I think he's out, although you never know. He may not be there anymore. So one method is the market, one method is the bureaucrat. Now there's a third method, which Obama talked about in this speech, and this is called integrated care. And integrated care, he claims this is a way to lower the cost of medical care itself. He says, we will get a team of doctors, and we will assign this team of doctors a certain population of patients. we will give the doctors a lump sum and saying that's the money you have this year to look after these patients.